Hey, Maggie.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Roy. You're Head of Wellbeing Technology at Reward Gateway and the creator of YOMP. For this session, we're going freeform, no slides. We're just going to sit here and have a bit of a chat.
Cool.
That doesn't mean you can't join in, so do please be sending through some questions for Rai, and we'll also be running a quick poll a little later in the session. So Rai, just to kind of set the scene and understand where we're coming from a bit, what are you hearing employees talk about when it comes to workplace wellbeing?
I think for employees, generally speaking across the board for employees, they have some core interests when it comes to what they expect from their employer. And that falls into a whole bunch of functions. I think wellness is one of those. So feeling empowered or supported, I guess, in their endeavors when it comes to wellness. And then above and beyond that, I think that some of the key values around autonomy or security that they can sort of expect from their employer. So when it comes to wellness, things like the autonomy to actually focus on what's important for them and what sort of they care about when it comes to their own health. So not just one-size-fits-all solution that's forced upon them by senior management. From a security perspective, knowing that their employer cares for them, that when they fall sick, that they'll actually be there to sort of help them out and get them back on track. So I think the key things from employees is traditionally what you might find in other silos of the workplace, that the sort of employer values are prevalent within wellness as much as any other thing, from learning and development to career progression.
Sure. And just to flip that round the other way, what are you hearing from the HR community? You could just ask this room actually, and other senior staff.
I think, the big topic, I guess, in the space is the ROI or the VOI, so the return on investment or the value of investment on whatever spend is put into wellness. And I think that's completely fair. At the end of the day, the person, the HRD or whomever is putting their neck on the line to implement a wellness platform or product is probably going to an FD or senior management and asking for the budget, and they then themselves are putting their neck on the line to even more senior management or board level to sort of spend. And just given the way career progression works traditionally in organizations, there'll often be older individuals who perhaps haven't used the tools like we've just seen or haven't come across that in a working environment. And that can be really, really difficult to then twist someone's arm into sort of writing a check to implement a brand new, never before seen wellness solution. Which I think is why the sort of forward-thinking thought leaders or innovators or early adopters in the space oft have either senior management or a CEO who gets it, I guess, whom has come from a background of either sport or teams or just looking after themselves, and understands the benefits that has to them and thus can have for their workforce. So Titus Sharp from MVF Global, I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning, had coffee with him the other week, and he definitely falls into that remit, which is why I'd argue, at least in part, they were the fourth, in the sort of Times best companies to work for, they came fourth, and it's because they've got a really big push on, at least in part, on wellness. And I think that's because the senior leadership buy-in is already there, and it makes it easier to sort of enact.
Sure. And I think we might have just already loosely touched on one of these, but I'd like to kind of just introduce a poll question at this point. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the barriers that are involved and some of the issues we've had to overcome. But I just wondered whether we could get the audience now to vote on the poll on the biggest barriers that you're finding. Start to see some. Ooh.
Yeah.
Some interesting scores coming through there.
I mean, I think the thing is with all of these, they're interlinked, because securing the budget largely can be enveloped into. It's much easier to do that if you've got case studies or evidence or sort of empirical backing that spending this budget is going to have an actual impact, which in turn, then when it comes to renewal or looking at what else is in the market is related to employee comms and uptake, because if you spend it and no one uses it, it falls flat on its face and you're going to find it really difficult to get buy-in in future. So I think they're all interlinked, but it is interesting to see that, that's necessarily the case.
Yeah. And does that reflect your experiences in talking to companies in terms of getting well-being through the door?
Yeah, I think the buy-in and albeit there's a shift in evidence around the outcomes. I think, again, we're starting to see those early adopters or innovators showing stats around engagement or uptake or a lessening in presenteeism and staff dissatisfaction or talent attrition. And I think the more time goes on, the more that we'll start to see those nuggets of information and insight come out that really empower people to get behind wellness within the workplace.
Sure. And how are you seeing sort of definitions of well-being within companies? What are you seeing as the balance between sort of prevention and cure when it comes?
I definitely think we need both. I think both are extremely important. My background and where I've spent a lot of my time is on the preventative piece. I do think there's an imbalance, but that's more because I think until now, the weight has heavily been on cure-based solutions. So, centuries-old industry of helping people get better when they get sick, sick leave, absenteeism, staff care, health insurance is there, and it's robust, and we need it. I think in the last couple decades, things have shifted slightly more into a middle ground of EAPs or workshops or HRAs, and that kind of gets towards catching things before they become too serious, but it's still not at the crux of empowering people to take preventative steps to improve their wellness, which is where I think in the last few years and where the huge shift is going is into this preventative approach. So helping people to form healthy habits in a fun, social, and engaging way essentially means that less people will ultimately end up off, sick, and absent, which comes back to that whole piece around the ROI and VOI. So I think there's a huge shift occurring to that preventative piece. Where I get most excited, hopefully we can touch on it later, is when you take the sort of alliteration of prevention and add words like personalized and proactive to the mix as well. But yeah, hopefully I can pick up on that later.
Let's add personalized and proactive into the mix.
Okay. So everyone's talking about prevention, preventative healthcare, both from a B2C and B2B perspective. I think that's fine when you have tools that are preventative, like, the smoking cessation program is arguably preventative, and that's kind of, again, been around. When it becomes through, big topic of today, data, when you have that insight into the individual and their demographic or background, not in a big brother sense, and that's another point I'd love to come back to, is data and security and privacy. But when you know the individual and you're seeing them engage with the product and they're deriving value from it, you can start to tailor things around them. We've already heard examples from, LifeWorks and Bupa Boost, where we're starting to see arguably a watershed moment when you can actually tailor these solutions around what matters to the individual. To the extent that, what I see on my app or my platform becomes massively different to what even Joe or Joanna Bloggs sat right next to me sees. So I think from that personalization perspective, it becomes inherently important because there categorically is no silver bullet or one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to wellness. It's so disparate, let alone when you start splitting it into physical wellness, mental wellness, financial wellness. The needs of an individual, even in the same office, let alone across a global workforce, are vast. And for me, it has to be personalized. Proactive, I think we're going to start seeing, and by that I mean like openly in a nudge/push notification fashion, telling individuals some tips and advice before they even have in their own minds the realization that they need that tool. So we're seeing it in a B2C context with AI and sort of machine learning and the data and the insight. But in a HR sense, an arbitrary example might be I'm using a wellness system and I get a little push notification saying, hey, Rai, 80% of people like you found that this tool helped improve their sleep by 20%. And that's based on my usage stats, my personal sort of attributes, and what others like me have found to be powerful in improving my wellness. And that's a very proactive nudge. From a HR sense, it might be things like on an anonymized, aggregated basis, still want to come back to data and privacy, that as a HRD or someone who's running a department or office or even a sort of territorial specific workforce, you get a notification that says, hey, Joe or Joanna Bloggs, your team in this particular office location in Manchester are extremely stressed compared to the aggregated data set of the rest of your workforce, or they're sleeping really badly. And this is not pinpointing an individual and sort of haranguing them up for staying up till 4 a.m. Sure. But that in itself, it doesn't answer the question, but it raises the question in a proactive way that maybe there's something wrong there and you might want to look into it. Is their boss a narc? Are their KPIs too high? Have you put too much pressure on them? And that is a very proactive approach to wellness that hopefully helps get to the crux of the issue before it becomes, a huge problem around staff dissatisfaction and them looking elsewhere.
Sure. We're getting some really great questions coming through on the screen. So before we move to those, just one last thing from me, which is you mentioned the other P of privacy. A really kind of interesting and very hot topic around this. So what's your view on it?
Yeah. I can see both sides of the fence. I think for the employee, they're worried about this dystopian sort of Big Brother-esque future of being harangued for not doing all the right things, and I think it's a legitimate concern. For the employer, they obviously want workforce insight to make improvements and understand their workforce better and on a deeper level. I have to side more with the employee for two main reasons. One, an employee or any platform, forget wellness, forget HR, any platform generally speaking, a user will only engage with it if they're getting some form of reciprocal value. So whether that's signing up to a newsletter because you want the offers or using your club card because you want the discounts, it's by and large an exchange of them giving their data for some inherent value back. And if at any point they feel they're just putting their data into a black box for Big Brother, then I think quite quickly you will find an attrition of usage and engagement. So there always has to be that reciprocal gain, and we always, I think we saw in the last presentation, put the user first, the user experience, what's in it for them, not what can I as a employer or HRD get out of it, but what can we derive and deliver for the user. And the second reason is I think the moment any employee even has an inkling that they're being snooped on or sort of having their data pried apart and picked to pieces, that's already too late. At that point, they're going to disappear in the blink of an eye from the system. Again, it's not just wellness, but it's especially poignant in wellness when it's something that personal. So we just have to always be overtly clear when we're providing these solutions that it's not to sort of pick someone up individually because they were out late last night, and you can see that based on their sleep, which comes back to trust and data privacy. I think the good companies out there are doing anonymized aggregate trends with a core minimum of, say, 10 people, so you can never even see like a team of 3, because then you can pick the odd one out. But it's this aggregated view. Aggregate
view. That's great. Thanks very much indeed for that. Right. Now, I'm seeing I'd be devastated not to just have one question, but I think we probably have only got time for one. So I'm going to roll those top 2 questions together and ask you sort of around making the best case investment-wise for wellbeing and the timeline that you might expect to see the return on investment. As I say, we're fairly swift on time, so okay. All of that.
There are some awesome companies out there doing some awesome things, and don't want to name check any, but we're starting to see empirical, clinical sort of trial studies coming out with good data from wellness initiatives. I think, just picking one in particular, you take something like mindfulness, great book called Mindful Work, worth picking up, that has oodles of this stuff around the effect it has on employee focus or productivity or engagement. And I think, the more time goes on, the more we're going to see that sort of thing come to the fore. And a general shift through pressures of financial burdens, rising healthcare costs, the millennial workforce that actually expects their employer to give a crap about them. I think we're going to see those sorts of pressures kind of force people's hands, for better or for worse, alongside some good stuff that's coming out from a clinical perspective.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think, with great regret, we're going to have to leave it there. So many thanks indeed, Rai. That was a fantastic insight into wellbeing.